You don't have to defeat an enemy army by killing every single soldier. You just have to defeat the enemy's will to fight on, to conquer his mind. In the Second World War, when the Western democracies were fighting for our very survival and our enemies were brutal and mighty, we knew there would be a high price to pay, not just our governments, but our popular opinion too. When news of the war dead made it back home, it was cause for grieving, but also for resolve. Of course, the generation that fought and won the Second World War, the greatest generation, as it's called, is almost all gone now. Now we have the baby boomers who were born after the war. Their war, the war in Vietnam, was lost precisely because America lost its will to fight. The United States was militarily and economically far mightier than the ragtag communists from North Vietnam, but the popular culture was not one of sacrifice and duty and freedom, but of free love and music and marijuana. America lost the will to win. And here we are, a generation or two later, Generation X and the millennials. Our tolerance for sacrifice is near zero. We're all about luxury and recreation and convenience and the newest app on your cell phone. Unlike the baby boomers who had the military draft to fight Vietnam, there is no draft in Canada or the United States. Every U.S. and Canadian soldier is a volunteer. And in the 13 years since 9/11, any volunteer would have gone in knowing there was a high likelihood of seeing combat. Our armed forces are smaller than they have been in decades. The level of technology means that it is possible to have fewer casualties than ever. There is no expectation that the wider population make any sacrifice or commitment at all these days. And yet still, even now, we lack the will to fight on. We are excessively squeamish. World War II saw widespread sacrifices by everyone, even rationing. Vietnam saw a smaller sacrifice, mainly in the form of the U.S. draft. But now we can't even stomach watching other people voluntarily make sacrifices. That's how delicate we've become. Not only do we not want to fight, but we don't want others to fight for us. Which brings us back to the will to win and the ability of others to defeat us by sapping us of that will. Because our enemies watch us and learn, certainly more attentively than we watch them and learn. They have watched how we replaced courage and duty with comfort and willful blindness. They saw how the mighty United States Marines were driven out of Lebanon in 1983 by Hezbollah attacking their barracks. It was an atrocious, murderous attack, but instead of finding resolve, the terrorists found fear. In another Muslim country, Somalia, the United States military was on another mission of mercy there, but it took far less to drive the U.S. out, as memorialized in that Hollywood film Black Hawk Down. Americans just seeing their soldiers dragged through the streets was enough to sound the retreat, where once it would have sounded for retribution. The United States, though its military has been degraded and defunded enormously since the fall of the Berlin Wall, is still the world's most powerful. But in recent years, its commanders-in-chief have been so afraid of deploying that military that they prefer to fight video game style, using airplanes and unmanned drones. That's how the U.S. and Canada toppled Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, and it worked. But without the moral will to put soldiers on the ground, Islamic terrorists quickly filled that void in Libya. The whole Benghazi attack, that was a direct result of the United States and Canada unwilling to even put a bare-bones military force on the ground in the country whose government we had just toppled. Barack Obama has made this low-commitment military style his public calling card in recent years. When he was threatening to attack Syria's Bashar Assad over its alleged use of chemical weapons, he and his cabinet positively announced that it would be pinprick cruise missile strikes and drones, nothing more, lest there be casualties.
We're not going to war. We will not have people at risk in that way. We will be able to hold Bashar Assad accountable without engaging in troops on the ground or any other prolonged kind of effort, in a very limited, very targeted, very short-term effort that degrades his capacity to deliver chemical weapons without assuming responsibility for Syria's civil war.
Of course, even that didn't happen. That was too much. And in the current U.S. and Canadian effort to attack Islamic State terrorists in Iraq and Syria, same thing, no soldiers, just airplanes and drones to minimize the risk of casualties.
The notion that the United States should be putting boots on the ground I think would be a profound mistake, and I want to be very clear and very explicit about that.
You do not have to be a scholar of military history. You do not have to be a well-connected diplomat. You do not need to be any sort of expert or spy to observe and conclude that the United States has lost most of its will to fight. And so I come back again to my thesis of wars ending when one side's will is gone, not when every U.S. soldier is defeated in battle by an opponent. That will never happen. But when some opponent conquers America's mind, or at least conquers the mind of its commander-in-chief, and Canada too. That's why terrorism works. And that's why we are seeing so much of it today. In an earlier era, atrocities such as the beheadings of U.S. and British citizens by terrorists on the internet would have stirred such a rage that the sleeping giant of the Western military might would rise up and kill every terrorist in the world. That's what happened when Pearl Harbor was attacked. A sleeping giant was awoken. Now, individual acts of barbarism and savagery don't rouse us. They scare us. They make us not want to risk the burdens of fighting back. Though, of course, the only burden that 99% of us would feel is the burden of watching on TV as someone else, a volunteer, fights for us willingly. But we can't even stomach that. Osama bin Laden's speeches are full of foolishness and self-deception and lies and even fascism, but there are some insights to be found in them, like his simple comment that people admire a strong horse. If they see a strong horse and a weak horse, they prefer the strong horse. Al-Qaeda isn't the strong horse, and neither is the Islamic State, at least not compared to the United States. But the way we react to them makes them seem strong. Did they not drive out the Americans from Iraq? Have they not reconquered much of Iraq and Syria? Have they not put the U.S.-equipped Iraqi army into full retreat to the very suburbs of Baghdad itself? And so for young Muslim extremists in the West, who like all young men yearn for some adventure and meaning, and have added to that the allure of a toxic death cult that promises them martyrdom and 72 virgins in heaven if they go join the jihad, for those young men in London, England, in Paris, France, and in Calgary, our own country of Canada, who go to the Middle East to join the Islamic State terrorists, as thousands have done, they are the strong horse, because they have found out how easy it is to defeat the West's will to fight. There's psychopathic extremism. I'm calling it a form of mental illness, but of course they are not crazy, any more than Hitler was crazy. It doesn't do us any good to simply call evil an illness. That's a cop-out. Evil is real. Their own Islamic fascism makes them particularly immune to the impatience and ennui and love of comforts that afflict us in the West, because while we love life, they love death. We despise suicide as contrary to every moral and ethical precept in the West, an abomination against the reason God made us. Islamic fascists love death, the death of their enemies, of course, but even their own death, if it hastens their trip to heaven as martyrs. Muslim suicide bombers are not mentally ill. They are evil. And they so terrify us that they are able to conquer our minds. Today's show is about terrorism, about how ignorant, medieval savages are beating us, not through military or economic superiority, and not through the superiority of their ideas, but because of our lack of courage and duty, and our preference for ease and comfort. I won't say I hope you enjoy today's show, but I hope you'll find it interesting.